Good morning. In today's In Conversation, Richard will talk to Pat Evans about her time as Farnham Town Council's town clerk and more recently as Mayor of Farnham. This, together with Pat's impressive career ranging from private to public sector, gives us a unique opportunity to explore her views on how the various councils work together on behalf of Farnham's community. More recently, Pat has been involved with the Farnham Connects initiative, matching and identifying residents' needs with proactive, helpful solutions offered by Farnham's very own volunteers and volunteer groups. So overall, this should be a fascinating conversation. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, Pat, good morning. I'm delighted to be joined. Yes, good morning. I'm delighted to be joined by Madam Mayor, Mayor of Farnham, but I'm sure you don't mind if I call you Pat.
Oh, everybody does, don't they? Madam Mayor Pat.
Madam Mayor Pat, exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us for a chat this morning. As Michelle has explained, this is a sort of a series of conversations we're doing with well-known people around Farnham that can help tell the story of Farnham and give it some sort of life in the context of these conversations, which replace what we would have done in terms of face-to-face and the normal events program. So like everybody else, here we are on Zoom, but I have my coffee, so I hope you're comfortable. And we'll get started. I thought I might start, Pat. I think, are coming up for a 2-year term as mayor and hand over, what, in a couple of months' time? But 2 years is unusual, isn't it?
It is unusual, but it's been caused by COVID. One would normally just do 1 year, but lockdown came in March. I was due to hand over to the next mayor in May, and the council made a decision to ask the mayor to vote in the mayor for a 2nd year of continuity, because the mayor is the #1 citizen of Farnham, and she is, the person is, not necessarily she, is chairman of the council, which means that there were going to be decisions that had to be made, and also chairing council meetings, which were Zoomed. So that was the decision that was reached.
You probably would go back to March like I do and think Zoom. Had I ever heard of Zoom in March last year? And here we are. I presume you didn't either, did you?
No.
And here we are, assuming Zoom is the way that we work, and even council meetings. But can I come to the council? Because in my sort of conversations with friends and family and others, the understanding of what the town council is perhaps not as well known as we might think it is. So the role of the town council in Farnham and having a mayor is itself not a normal situation, because isn't the town council effectively a parish council?
It is normal at this level. You've got 3 tiers of local government. You've got Surrey County Council, Principal Council, and it has certain responsibilities by law. And that includes the big things: roads, education, welfare. Then you come down to Waverley Borough Council. When I was first around, they were a district council. They're now a borough council because they chose to have a mayor, not a chairman. And they have other responsibilities. They also have ownership of most of the properties, so car parks, for instance, and they take the revenue from them, and recreation, so sports centres. Now, Farnham Town Council is a 3rd tier council, and yes, 3rd tier is town and parish councils. It covers an enormous stretch. You've got really small parishes who perhaps only meet once a year because legally that's what they have to do. Whereas Farnham Town Council, along with a number of councils in the country, have grown to be really big councils, and they take their responsibilities seriously, and they have been looking to have other responsibilities devolved from particularly Waverley, in order that they can, and this is me saying, work with the community for the community.
Yeah.
That was my aim when I stood as a councillor, and it has remained through these 2 years, where a community council in Wales, they actually call them community councils.
Right.
And we're trying to do the best for the people in the town, and to give them good facilities and things.
So you say the town, so the area of responsibility for the town council is what? Because we have this lovely environment, don't we, here with the town, and we have the villages around the town, and I often hear Farnham and villages described. So the area of responsibility of the town council is it just the confines of the town, or does it extend to wider?
You know, what are the confines of the town? That would become a debate. Yeah, but no, it's actually the perimeter is outside and including all of the villages.
Right.
Now, Rowledge have been looking, as you probably know, to have their own council as a village, but that hasn't happened. Currently, they are part of the Farnham area, which covers all of them, you know, whether it's Recklesham, Badshot, Lee, Bourne, Hale and Heath End, Upper Hale, they're all part of Farnham. But of course, they are all different, and therefore they have different needs and different desires. And of course, we're recognising it at the moment with the Farnham infrastructure plan, that what they individually want is not necessarily what is envisaged for the town centre.
I remember attending an annual town meeting. I think that's what it was called, way back before COVID. It was probably 2 years ago or something. And I was struck by the sort of questions that were being asked at that annual meeting, which implied people thought the town council had responsibilities for various things, which I understand, in fact, they don't. Back to your tier system. So what are the specific responsibilities of the town council, the things that you have your levers on being able to make happen, for example?
There are specific legal responsibilities that we have, really exciting things, but they are to some people. So cemeteries, and of course there are 4 in Farnham, allotments, bus shelters, so very specific things like that. But the way that the town council is set up, it does not have committees, because committees would have delegated authority. The only authority is with the council, and so they're working groups, and the members are expected to work within them. And therefore you have got community enhancement, for instance, and that's all the in bloom things, which are very considerable. So those working groups take on other responsibilities, and gradually property is coming back to Farnham. For instance, we've just had Gostry Meadow pass back from Waverley. So there's a lot of work going on Gostry Meadow with improving the children's play area.
Right. So when you say pass back, in the sense that the town council now becomes responsible for the amenity of Gostry Meadow and can hold whatever events it wants, etc.
Yes, that it has the ownership of the land.
Right.
And and when I say pass back, there was an act in 1972 which did away with the council that existed in Farnham, for instance, which was an urban district council.
That was a big part of a much bigger reorganisation, wasn't it, in 1972?
You're absolutely right. But of course, Farnham Urban District Council no longer even owned its own building, which is the town hall. Now, all of the property passed into the ownership of Waverley District Council. And so Farnham was left with very little, and it chose not at that time to become a successor town council. It had a committee. Now, eventually they realized that they couldn't achieve very much in that format. And so they did become a town council with their own armorial bearings and everything with it. So what is coming back now, the town hall, Gostrey Meadow, they were once in the ownership of Farnham. They are coming back into the ownership of Farnham.
Well, I'm sure a lot
Isn't
of people.
That great.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure a lot of people would say, well, that's terrific, you know, the ownership. Now, you mentioned the word bloom, and one of the things that I think is very noticeable, and in fact, my wife said to me this week, have you seen the spring planting, which is fantastic?
Yeah.
But Farnham in Bloom has been a notable aspect of our springs and summers and even into the autumn. How did that start? That's a town council responsibility, and where do the plants come from, which are amazing?
Yeah, right. A little bit about me. I became town clerk in
I'm going
Farnham
to come on to that.
in the year 2000.
Right.
And during that time, there was a wonderful group of ladies led by, the name is gone, but I will recall it. Anyway, she was very well known in Farnham, and she used the greenhouses down in West Street with her ladies to put up hanging baskets and things like that. Now, that was how it started. And the town council, the workforce, were actually helping them tremendously because there's all the planting, but then there's all the watering and the nurturing and the everything else.
Yeah.
And she was elderly and felt that it would not continue without her. Now, this was all during my time, and we said, oh, yes, it can, because we're going to support you more and more. And of course, gradually we took over. And therefore, we have a well-experienced manager. And I appointed the first one, Kevin. And he was there for about 15 years, I think. And they built it up to what it is today. And we have the facilities to buy in those little tiny plants called plugs, and they nurtured them on. But what developed with it was this wonderful community program. Right. Because, you know, sort of there's Kids in Bloom, for instance, everything's in bloom. And we do little courses for the children who come down to the depot, and they learn how to plant and everything, and then they take off a plant for their mum, and they look after that. So and they were all volunteers, and therefore, although Farnham Town Council it manages it, it's the volunteers who run it. That program would not run without volunteers, and that's what's so important and special about Farnham.
That ran last, and despite the difficulties of COVID, that ran last year as well, didn't it? And we had all those other big planters that appeared. But it's a real characteristic. Now, you mentioned that's what's special about Farnham. So from your long association now, and particularly your role as mayor, how would you characterize Farnham to somebody moving here for the first time? What's special about Farnham?
I think what is special is that people give support to each other. And this has really been identified during COVID because, and you were part of the organization who originally met weekly and developed into 35 individuals and organizations who were identifying need, and they were supporting it. And there were people making scrubs, and there were people making masks. There were people collecting food for people who couldn't get out. The support of people for each other and for volunteering, I think is just exceptional. And although 40,000 population we are, they still manage, all of them, to support each other. They support each other in their communities, but across the board, the organizations, Lions, Hedgehogs, Rotary, they have been manning the vaccination as that continues. Now, none of this could be done without volunteers. So yes, I know Farnham is a very beautiful town. We're lucky that we live in a beautiful Georgian town with lovely architecture and a wonderful castle at the top of the hill. You know,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fairyland, but it's, to me, the people really who make it, and the way they pull together.
It's almost like a silver lining of this terrible year in so many ways that we've all been through, that it's created the opportunity, hasn't it, to bring all these different organizations you refer to with their independence, but together in a collaborative hub. That must be one of the things that many people are going to look back on and say, maybe wouldn't have happened in quite the way it has without, you know, the pandemic and what it's forced. Do you reflect something similar?
You express that so well. We've always had so many charitable organizations, Farnham Assist, and fundraising organizations, but this has brought them all together. And that is what is so exceptional. The lack of duplication, because they actually come together, they support each other. Incredible. If there was an award of some sort, I think Farnham ought to get it for its volunteers overall.
And of course, maintaining that is going to be one of the challenges. But it was amazing to see in the latest Farnham Connects, which is what it's called, meeting that you're referring to, even after all this length of time, there were 31 participants on the call. So the momentum is still there. But look, let me take you back to what you referred to there, because I think the other interesting part of our mayor was your previous role as town clerk. And I wonder whether you could take us back to how you moved into that role and your time in that role.
It's I suppose it's quite, no, it's not unusual. And I'm going to land up by saying that, actually. But yes, I entered local government having been in commerce, where I had worked for Unilever and Esso, and you can't get much bigger than that. But my daughter, I have only one daughter, and she was born 60% deaf. Right. And so I stopped working because I wanted to be there for her development. And she went to St. Catherine's School. And that was when I was screaming to have a job. And we lived in Godalming originally. We came to Godalming in 1972. And the town clerk was looking for an assistant town clerk. I got the job. It was perhaps fate that he and I had gone to sister and brother grammar schools in Beckenham in our time. Anyway, I got the job, and when he retired, I became town clerk. But I had studied by that time, and I had a degree, a 2-1, a BA in local policy, which is local government degree, which meant that I was fully qualified in every single aspect. That was how I came into local government, rather than staying out there in the big business world. And I just became totally committed to this business of community. I'd always worked for the community, but when I was in Godalming, you know, I was on school governors, and I was the town clerk who started Go Godalming, which has really motivated the town there. In the year 2000, I said I needed Millennium Challenge. I'd been there 20 years, and my Millennium Challenge was Farnham.
Right. Oh.
So
I mean,
I was
many
appointed.
people have forgotten the millennium now, haven't they? Me, but
Yeah,
you're a millennial in certain senses then for us in Farnham.
you're right. You're right. I mean, by this time we lived in Farnham because we had moved to Farnham in 1984.
Right.
So I was well and truly, part of Farnham. And this was doing a job that I loved with a community that I knew. So that was how it happened.
Fantastic. You mentioned an award. I want to move us on a little bit because I'm aware, and I hope this is public or you're able to say it, that there's consideration of holding a Farnham Literary Festival in the future. And again, it would be a terrific activity for Farnham. Now, if you can't say anything about it at this stage, well, you can. But it grew out of what was an interesting recent initiative by Reverend Leslie Crawley to hold a lockdown poetry festival where you were announcing the award winner. So, I mean, I presume that was something that you really welcomed with your emphasis on community. And again, it's something that looks as though it will lead to something as a legacy.
Absolutely. In fact, they were developing at the same time because one working group is events and tourism. And so clearly things have been very curtailed because of lockdown. We did manage some music in the park by distancing and everything else, but we haven't done the winter one. We've also managed to have farmers markets by careful management and distancing. So that committee has been looking at how it wanted to move ahead. And the idea came from one of those members that they would like a literary festival. At the same time, Leslie was organising her poetry competition. And so I got involved and I gave some prizes and presented. And I said to her, we're planning it for next year. Will you come in and be part of it? And she said yes. And she is now part of the working group that's actually working on that. Now, somebody said, I think it might have been you, Richard, hey on why. And so I jokingly said at a meeting last week, sort of, why can't we be Farnham on the way? But that will not happen. They will have a specific title. Yes, that's going to happen next year. And it's a question of the best time for it. I think it's likely to be round, well, they were talking about March.
Apologies, my dog always likes to get in on these conversations, but it's to do with the postman arriving, I think.
Okay.
The fact of a literary festival, I mean, I think there's one in Guildford, isn't there? So, there are others in our general environment. But it begs the question for me of the role of the university in the town, and from your perspective of mayor, that we have this well-renowned University for the Creative Arts. And it comes up in conversation that, does it feel at the centre of the town? Does it feel like a university town? I wonder what your view was about that, and whether more should be done to bring the university into more of the life of the town.
Well, I think more is being done for the very reasons you say. They are in the centre of the town, but think of the number of students who are there. But now I think that we are a craft city that will draw them in, because that's what they are. They're a university of the creative arts, and therefore they should be much more involved. And yes, the town council is working on that. It likes its partnerships, does the town council, and therefore it works closely with the Maltings, and it will be working on that. So the answer is yes.
Well, it's something that we discuss, and maybe that's a collaboration we can explore as well. Interestingly, I have a very good close friend whose godfather was one of the founders of the Farnham Art College back in the day. So yes. He's always asking me about Farnham, even though he lives in Kent. But we've got the components, haven't we, of making Farnham I was going to say not even more special, but we're lucky to have these components in the environment of our town, aren't we?
Oh, we are.
Yeah. So as mayor, if you look back, or maybe even as from 2000, what's the notable thing? What would you identify as one of the highlights of your time in Farnham? Maybe what you're most proud of?
Gosh, that's a really difficult one to answer.
Oh, good.
I um, I think for me, opportunity, because I've had wonderful opportunities here to do the things I'm really interested in and to progress them. So I was very fortunate to have the appointment as town clerk here, and to be here at a time when, yes, it really had been a parish council and it'd been talking shop and it hadn't been doing very much. And that blossomed. And of course, it continued to blossom after I retired. So that is really important that I've had that opportunity. Also, I very lucky, but when I did retire, and incidentally, I retired in order to become one of the first women district governors in Rotary International. And that was the year 2008-9. And there was a lot of training for that and going to the States and all sorts of things, all voluntary, of course. You don't get paid for any of that at all. But Virginia Bottomley was president up at the castle, and they were looking for a company secretary. So it was not a full-time job, and she recommended that they talk to me about it, which they did. So I took on the company secretaryship of the castle at the top of the hill. So that was, another bit of it. And during that time, they appointed me to be on the board, to be a trustee. So again, a wonderful building, wonderful history, really a central part. And that's why I've come back again, because I still think that I've got such an interest in the town and that I have something to give, even now. So I wanted to give it. But I certainly, I was quizzical about being elected, would I, wouldn't I? And then to be asked to be mayor was such a shock. So I'm very fortunate.
Lovely. As I walk around Farnham, I'll imagine your footsteps in so many places, in so many ways. Yeah. How would you sell Farnham to somebody if they're thinking of moving out this way?
I would say the biggest benefit is your local community. And an instance, we moved into Lancaster Avenue, which is off Great Austin's. That little road has its own residents association. And so, they all support each other, and they're not nosy, but they're there if they're needed, etc. And I think that's a great benefit to people moving in, to have support, and to have a council that's interested in them and does wonderful things like In Bloom, which makes it such a wonderful environment to live in. And everywhere we've got our little play areas and everything else. It's not just a mass of houses, although of course we're having more and more pushed on to us, but they are communities. And I think the schooling here is par to none, in that they're children, and in fact, when I know of a couple who bought a house in order to be close to their children, in order to look after their grandchildren, because it was all to do with South Farnham School.
Yeah.
No,
and we're very lucky. We're very lucky with the schools. So I suppose on the other side of that coin, what worries you about the future?
I think this government pressure on housing, and undoubtedly Farnham has become a prime place to live. That makes property expensive. Therefore, developers are only too happy to get in and build houses, and the prices keep going up. I worry about younger people because of how they can actually become part of the community. And I would hate to think that we just had an elderly community because we couldn't afford to have any younger people. I just can't wait for, you know, those developments at Brightwells, etc. Whatever one thinks about them, please get them finished and get them in use.
We are where we are, and to make the best use of everything. I suppose one thing that does crop up is the way in which the green spaces between Farnham and elsewhere may also get compromised by development. It's not a problem unique to Farnham by any manner or means, is it? What about it becoming too much a commuter town? You know, no real.
I think COVID has changed that.
Yeah.
I think that people have become used to working at home and liking it. And I think, you know, the use of the computers and Zoom and everything else. I think a lot of companies in London will downsize, and then maybe we'll have a small office that people visit irregularly, but people actually work from home. So, you know, I think the commuter town is likely, and I would like to think it would lessen. Yeah.
So you're coming up for your end of your period of office, and I suppose one of the questions which comes to mind, you've always come across to me as enjoying it, and it speaks to what you've described in our conversation, you know, this focus on community. So what are you going to miss about not being mayor of Farnham?
Meeting so many people.
But that's been difficult, hasn't it, in COVID? I was going to, you know, say, if you did say that, exactly that point.
What about that first year? I've done 2 years.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So I had the full experience in that first year. I did over 300 appointments.
Goodness.
And yes, that is a lot. And, you know, there was a day when I think I started at 9 o'clock in the morning and I didn't finish until 10:30 at night. And I was going, you know, from one place to another, and all different. You know, I represent the town at things that are organised, shall we say, by the Lord Lieutenant on behalf of the Queen. No, I'm still waiting for an invitation to a Queen's garden party because of COVID. I haven't had it. But, you know, sort of going to care homes was made you very reflective of both sides, you know, of patients and those who looked after them. The repair cafe was the most wonderful surprise to see all of those people queuing up on a Saturday morning in order to go in there, you know. And whilst I was there, the students from the university were making a film, and that was going to be sent back to China. They were the Chinese students, and so they were going to be encouraging China to do it. Just so many different, of course, I've done heritage open days with the Farnham Society, and I'm going to talk at Farnham Rotary in a couple of weeks' time. So lots in that first year, just meeting so many people. And yes, I've been around for a long time, but being town clerk in the millennium onwards, that's almost 20 years away, and things change and people change. So, but you wanted me to ask me about COVID, did you, Richard?
I'm going to finish with COVID because, you know, it has dominated and changed a great deal. And you've talked about the way it's brought people together. You've talked about volunteers and community, but more broadly than that, how are we going to come out of COVID in terms of the vibrancy and the success of the town? What do you see as the challenges? And perhaps we'll finish on this topic. What do you see as those main challenges? The closure of shops, the change in retail come to mind.
Right. I think it's ongoing, which is the Farnham infrastructure programme, which is going to have an enormous effect on Farnham, hopefully for the better. Now, that has actually started and been ongoing during COVID. And I think that the outcome of that, and I'm pleased there's been the opportunity for people to contribute to that and to make their views known on that. So, you know, that possible change in traffic flows and possible pedestrianisation. As we come out of COVID, they're doing quick wins at the moment. So it'll be 20 miles an hour through the town and no HGVs. And I think that comes in June. So to start off with, there are some changes. Yes, the closure of the shops is worrying, isn't it? And as it goes on, it's going to be even worse, isn't it? Because financially, the retailers are really going to continue to suffer. I love my little department store, but financially it must be suffering terribly. And of course, earlier on, it used to be a family business. So yes, those are concerns about jobs and people's financial viability is another one of those problems. Can we in any way create jobs here in Farnham? One has to hope that with all the planning applications that come in, they won't just be for housing, that there can be for some industrial, not heavy industrial, some developments where people can get jobs. I think the people are always going to pull together. The town council, I would hope, just isn't going to change its attitude, which is to support not only people, but support businesses and the Chamber of Commerce and all of those things that they support at the moment. So I'm hopeful, but I recognise that the problems will continue. I think we've been really lucky that we've had such a very good programme of vaccination, because I think so many people are being vaccinated.
Yes,
I mentioned
absolutely.
to you, I have my second vaccination next week. Yeah. So that's really good.
We started, as we emerge from COVID, with a number of important pillars. You know, we've talked about the town council and its role. We've talked about the university. We've talked about community. I guess what is on the agenda is to ensure we can create a vibrancy about the life in the town centre as retailing changes. And are there any plans for any other festivals or markets? I know there's been press speculation in the past that, you know, we should have more markets or food festivals or whatever.
The plan for next year is still to have the food market, which is September. Now that brings just, you know, 10,000 plus people into the town. That will benefit the shopkeepers. That is still planned. So food market, Christmas market again, but this is obviously going to be dependent on how sharp lockdown is. So the town council is planning to continue with what's good. It's just got a sponsor for Music in the Park, which, no, I won't be mentioning who that is, but it's really good, because there was concern, would there be any sponsors for anything, and therefore could it be afforded? No, the literary festival is new, but of course, Craft City, that's going to build up. October is Craft Month, and there will be more and more craft elements to that. One addition, we've had a trial one, and we're going to have another couple, is the West Street Market. So that's just closing off West Street on a Sunday morning. And two of those are planned, one of them being an antiques market, you know, not a rubbishy market, but an antiques market. So the plans continue, and they will only be affected but by the restrictions that might exist at that time.
Well, Pat, the time has slipped by. I should have allowed more time, but you end on an optimistic note. And do I take it that despite the pressures of Southeast development and housing and the change in jobs, would I be right to characterize you as optimistic about the future for Farnham?
That's my character.
You know,
I am an optimistic person, and Farnham could really take a lead in this and say, look what we've done, which of course has always been the message. Look what we've done, and we do it so well.
Brilliant. Madam Mayor, Pat, thank you for your time this morning.
And thank you, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. A very interesting reflection of challenging times for our councils, with some interesting personal insights from Pat. As Pat says, Farnham's residents have made Farnham's community shine throughout these very difficult times. Thank you, Pat and Richard.